GM friends, and welcome to the Future of Gaming. You are listening to our weekly FOGcasts. Today's a special episode. I have Harry Holmwood and Ste Curran with me, co-founders and respectively CEO and creative director of Magicave. This is almost to the week a year after we did our first introductory celebratory recording that we did live at Develop in Brighton with, and those are better times, with a mojito or a gin tonic. That was it. With gin and tonics. And years gone by, and I think this warrants an update. I think the previous episode we did with the Medicals by Navik, so I'll link that in the description. So if you want to know where we started, you can watch that. But maybe this is a good moment to perhaps do a brief reintroduction of you guys, of what you're building, and where you are now. So, Harry, you want to start?
Yeah, so we've been building now for over a year. What we're building is a project called Dino or D Number, and the theory is that we kind of want to create a digital hobby that's akin to like a Warhammer or a D&D, that kind of thing. Where if you walk into a Warhammer store, you've got one wall that's full of the figures and the paints, and there's sort of that element of the hobby there. There's areas where it's full of books or full of boards or full of magazines about the and I remember as a kid playing D&D that there would be there was my friend who was the dungeon master who was really into creating the worlds. There were the guys that were really arty, that were into painting the figures. I was a sort of stats nerd that kind of memorized the monster manual and the player's handbook and knew every stat and every sword, what it needed to hit and what you needed to roll to get this and that. And I like the fact that the D&D as a hobby kind of brought together people with different interests, with different skills and passions. And I think you can do that digitally as well. And I think that, what's interesting from a Web3 point of view is that you can create these hobbies and that there are different facets of that hobby. So, most people are just going to want to play but may want to engage in different ways. Some people might want to create in that ecosystem. Some people might want to create and make money in that ecosystem, or some people may want to own things in that ecosystem or build things in that ecosystem, whether it's characters or worlds or whole games. And so what D Number is about is trying to kind of curate an ecosystem that facilitates that, all the way from making games, making digital items, but also making available our technology and our SDKs for other people to be able to play in that space.
Love that. Steve.
Hi. I would echo what Harry was saying, obviously, because we're working on the same thing, but also emphasize that I think the vast majority of people just want to play. And so what we're trying to do is make toys, small toys, that people can play with. And most of those people will engage with those toys in the ways that we construct, right, with the games that we build around those toys. But other people will take those toys and do whatever they want with them. And that's the really, really exciting part for me.
Great. So 1 year later, what do we have now? Where's Magicave at?
That's a big question. I guess one of the things that happens when you develop something is you develop by inches, right? And you see the thing change small amounts every day. And that stops you having that step back to see how much you've achieved over the course of the year. A year ago, we had a very, very small prototype of a game that was called Hex Gen, which was a roguelike prototype, showed a character going deeper and deeper into dungeons. It was basically two-dimensional prototype. And we had some technology that would generate the dice on which this hobby is based. And all of this stuff was kind of proof of concept. What we wanted to do with the game was for it to fill us with enough confidence that this was a good enough thing to go on and build into a bigger game, which now has a name. I'm not sure if we're talking about that name today or not.
We are.
Okay, which is called Beneath the Six. So HexGen has become that, has developed into a bigger 3D roguelike game. And when I say roguelike, what I mean is a game like Rogue, the original Rogue, rather than like a succession of roguelikes that have emerged from there. To such a point that the word roguelike almost means nothing. What we wanted to do was create a game harks back to the original Rogue. So it's solid dungeoneering, going down different levels, creating a character at the start, seeing how far you can get, and then repeating that over and over and over again. While at the same time learning all of the lessons that people have learned from the evolution of roguelikes. So it's kind of a hybrid roguelike, like Rogue, and like roguelikes, which is...
That is the quotes we're taking out of this one.
Honestly, a mouthful. So we've built that out. That's what we've been concentrating on building over the last year. We're, I reckon, a couple of months out from putting that out to the public. And when I say that, I mean a small subset of what that is, what we're calling a combat test. So it's not an early access version of the game. It's not an alpha. It's none of those things. What it is the combat loop, the kind of chess-like move around these hexagons, work out where it is safe to move next and which enemy it is best to attack next, and then move to another floor. We're calling it the arena.
Yeah, I mean, the way we talk about it internally, there's kind of three things that make up Beneath the Six. There's the combat, there's the exploration, and then there's the lore and stories. And that the combat test is really just the combat. So rather than these big procedurally generated dungeons, which is one of the pieces of tech we've built, it's small self-contained arenas. You can see the whole environment at one time. You go in there's a load of monsters, you kill the monsters, portal opens up, you go to the next level, and we'll generate a new one of these dungeons every day. And people can compete, people can see what kind of characters work against what kind of enemies, all the different so you generate the characters from the dice. You might have a set of wizard dice that have some kind of magical aura about them, or you might have a set of barbarian dice or rogue dice, and you can combine those in our character editor to create different characters. So, lots of wizard dice will be very strong on magic, but you start bringing in some warrior type dice and they'll probably have better melee fighting skills, for example. And so we'll launch with a very simplified version of that. So a very limited set of dice that you can play with and a very limited set of characters. Because the first thing we just want to be understanding is, are people enjoying the mechanics? Is the game, we're finding it fun now. It always happens with a game. You go through a phase of kind of building the core parts, and you've got this kind of, we think when we put this together with this and this, it's going to be fun. And eventually you come out the other side of it and it either is or isn't. And we're kind of at the point now where we're thinking, we're enjoying playing this now, which certainly wouldn't have been the case 6 months ago. So that's great. But the next step is to just get some more validation on that from a broader set of people that hopefully will join us on our Discord, become part of the community, help us as we navigate the journey as to what this game and the other games in the kind of ecosystem becomes. So what would be a great outcome for us over the next few months is a bunch of people come on our Discord, they enjoy playing the game, they enjoy competing on the game, they give us some feedback about, when the next version of the game comes out that's adding exploration, hopefully the people that are here now are kind of the early evangelists and fans of the games in the future. But it's one step at a time, basically. We think we're approaching the point where it's time to ask some other people, what do they think?
Last year, I remember, so Bitcraft invested in Magicave. Bitcraft led you around, Core led you around last year. And I remember during our pitch that the way you thought as a team about Web3 and games, and specifically NFTs, was fundamentally different than probably every other pitch I've had over the past 3 years. What can you tell me about how you're thinking about NFTs, what they bring to games, and how you see your approach differ from what you see in the market today?
I don't think our approach has changed at all since last year, which is one of the validating things about our approach. I think we started thinking about this incredibly volatile and future-centric space 18 months ago. And we started thinking about not what everyone else was doing, but in a kind of cold way about like the technology and what was interesting to about the technology to me as a game designer. Now, people who listened to the previous time we were on the show will know that to me that was the physicality that Web3 and blockchain lent to digital items, and that physicality being a illusion of sorts. Certainly, if you talk to Web3 skeptics, they will say all of this is nonsense. None of it is real. It's just a big database. You're buying into an illusion. As a game designer, I fully believe in the power of illusions, so that's not a counter argument to me. If the whole world buys into the fact that blockchain makes your items more real, even if some people are saying it doesn't, the technology is this, it doesn't matter. We've all bought into that illusion. All I can tell you as a light user in this space is that when I have taken an item from a place, be that, just a sales site or be that a game, and removed it and put it into my wallet and then put it back into the game, that transaction makes that item feel more real. So that's powerful to me. Like that as someone who all his life has built games and dealt in what amount to illusions, that's powerful. So that was our thesis right at the start. That was the thing that we approached you guys with. And to an extent, it's much more conservative than anything else in the Web3 space, which is using all kinds of, terms and technology that really genuinely I don't understand and kind of don't need to in the position we are at, which is we are using these items, we're using that illusion. What that allows people to do, I think, is deal with it on those terms. So if they own that item, they can do all kinds of things with it. Like Harry says, we want to build a hobby, and we want to build a hobby where people use these toys according to our rules, but also break out of our rules and build whatever they want. We define what these items are on the chain, and then they take those rules and they can build other games with them, or they can take them, paint them, or they can do, all kinds of stuff to them. But ultimately, if you're just a player like me, and you live in Web 2.5 at best, then you can just play the game with our objects and never really engage with that technology. And to me, that's more futuristic than a lot of the high concept games out there, because we want to deal with millions and millions of players, not the 100,000 Web3 evangelists that exist right now. We want to deal with millions and millions and millions of people. And that means dealing with people who just don't care about any of these things, just want to play our game. And that rests at the core of what we're doing. We're trying to make a really, really, really good game that also takes advantage of this technology.
Harry, what implication does that decision and that way of thinking have on the business model behind Magicave? Traditional Web3 games, they have a limited, well, in many cases, a limited number of assets that they sell, NFTs that they sell, and then a big part of the way they will monetize as a company or as a protocol is on secondary transactions. It is assuming that people will, be incentivized to actually sell their items to someone else, and then they'll take a share of that. How are you thinking about, the way you're approaching NFTs within the game, and what that means for the way you monetize as a company?
It's a good question. And I think, curiously, that the whole kind of Web3 game space it feels like, and I mean, maybe we'll all be proved to be very wrong, but it feels like if you sort of look 20 years into the future and you imagine what do we picture the world is going to be like? And certainly people that are enthusiastic about Web3, they see these economies and they see these decentralized games and they see them being mass market in the way that a Grand Theft Auto or whatever is mass market, and it feels like it's easy to see that far future, but it's far harder, I think, to see the near future and to see the steps that we have to go through from where we are to where we want to be, because it looks to me like the reality is this was the case when we started the company. I think it's still kind of the case now that there isn't that big crossover between gamers, as we sort of traditionally would have them in the games industry, and the Web3 enthusiasts. And a lot of projects, and we deliberately steered away from this, and this is why we looked to raise money from you guys in the first place, was we didn't like the sort of model of create an asset, sell the asset, hopefully the asset goes up in value, and then you're using that funding to develop a project. Because what we've seen is that, whether it's a coin or a bunch of NFTs or whatever, generally, nearly always, the value of those assets after some kind of wave of excitement has actually trended back down to near zero. And I think that kind of undoes the business proposition that a lot of those early adopters into the game were attracted to. And I think it's probably very hard to come back from there. So from the beginning, we kind of thought, okay, well, we've got to make desirable things that people want, and we have to, from the digital items, but we've also got to make a great game. Without a great game, kind of what's the point? It's, yes, you can create a speculative asset with a narrative attached to it, but it felt like that was a little blip that kind of happened at the beginning of Web3. So it's about creating this sustainable ecosystem. And I think that the right path is to assume, well, right now there aren't that many people playing Web3 games in the way that we see they'll be playing them in 20 years' time. And there's no point pretending that isn't the case. So we kind of need to be a foot in both worlds. It's certainly the case. I remember 25 years ago, working on PlayStation. We were, enormously successful releasing a game console, but we only had, I think we sold PlayStation something like 150 million consoles, right? And mobile had to come along before the number of gamers got into the billions. And we realized this is much more mass market than we thought. And maybe that's the same kind of thing that's going to happen with Web3. It's a niche hobby, but eventually, it's going to become like mobile, and lots of people are going to be wanting to engage in it. So I think, we need to be inventive enough and far, sort of visionary enough about the future. And I think our proposition is very future looking when you dig deep into the kind of Web3 ecosystem that we're looking to build. But I think in the short term, it may well be that a lot of our revenues are coming from fairly traditional sources. We will have traditional, non-blockchain monetization systems in the game, as well as the ability to buy objects, to create objects as NFTs. We need to recognize that not everybody is going to care about, do I own this thing on this blockchain or not? Do I want it in my wallet? Especially if we're not kind of in the business of, encouraging the speculation, which I think, maybe cash-wise useful for some projects to get some cash in the short term, but long-term is actually detrimental to the future of that project. So, we will need to be generating money in the same way that all other game companies generate money. And I suspect, I think we don't know yet what the KPIs for this industry are and what the balance of, crypto payments versus fiat payments is going to be for us. I suspect early on, we're going to have a reasonably high amount of standard gaming, free-to-play gaming type transactions. And over time, that the balance will probably change. But we don't know that yet. And in a way, we don't care that much about it yet, because until the game is good, until the game is enjoyable, and until we're starting to nurture this ecosystem, nothing else matters. One thing I learned from free-to-play is the only really important metric is retention. Right? You can have a game that monetizes incredibly, but if only one person gets retained, it's useless to you. So we've got to make a good game. We've got to find what is it that's going to make people want to come back, and I think the rest will come from there.
That's what I always liked about your approach, and what I like about what you're doing now. Whenever companies pitch to us, especially if they're pitching something after they already raised a seed round, they're asking me, like, what KPIs do you want? And my answer is always, like, I don't really care about your sales of NFTs. I don't care how many millions you manage to raise. I don't really care about how many people are in your Discord. What I really care about is, are people actually playing your game, and do they keep playing your game, and how long are they playing your game, and how long do they keep playing your game a month after, or after they started it first? And so all of these traditional KPI metrics still hold strong and remain to be the most relevant. What I find very interesting about your monetization approach and what you're thinking about the whole Magicave or D-number ecosystem is, it feels to me that it's almost Lego-like, in that the more people actually purchase assets, the greater their creative space becomes, the more ways they can interact with the universe, and the more if you put it in Lego terms, like I remember when I was young, when I was 10 years old, I had this castle that was a amalgamation of like some knights and traditional castle pieces, but I also had a spaceship that I then borrowed parts for to put in my castle. And so my castle was a Frankenstein monster of parts from different worlds and different universes. But it was great because it had high walls, and so I could do like these battles. And so I really like your approach and making sure that every additional NFT sale, which I can see being pretty small, but being meaningful in terms of what you can do with it and how it expands your enjoyment of everything.
That's completely correct. I mean, I'm surrounded by Lego. Like literally right now, whenever I'm doing something like this, I naturally have some Lego in my hand, playing with it, and I really like the way people engage with Lego. It was something we used in the pitch when we talked about it, in that when people buy a Lego set, often they just build the thing on the box. I would say that's probably the major use case, and that's what we imagine for our dice, in that people will, I imagine the majority of people will buy our dice and they will combine them in different ways, and the game gets more interesting the more dice you have, but essentially you'll play by our rules. And then there are some people who will take those dice, and we'll have an SDK around those dice which allow people to build their own experiences with them, build experiences within the D number universe and within the universe of Beneath the Six as well. So there'll be people enhancing our D&D style hobby with those things, and then there'll be people who take our Lego pieces and do things that us as Lego didn't understand that anyone would do anything with them, right? That in the same way as kids use Lego as, this is a bad example, but use Lego as traps for their parents and leave them all over the floor for people to stand on, right? That's not by design. But it is a sort of exciting thing as a designer, people using your toy in a different way. And to me, that was the really, really exciting thing about Magicave when we started thinking about it right at the start, was I've always thought the strength of video games is not in linear experiences, but in experiences where the player has agency. And the wider that agency, the more interesting the experience. And where games start to become toys, that's where I get really, really excited. And the way we position Magicave is, yeah, we make games, but we're actually a toy company. We're a digital toy company. And those toys are surrounded by a layer of games that we make, and we're good at that because we're games makers, but they're also surrounded by all this other stuff that other people make. That's the hobby, and that's the exciting part.
We sort of dipped our toes into the water of this when Ste and I were out at GDC, and you were there too. The rest of the team had a few days just to do a game jam. We split the Beneath the Six team into three teams? So just a handful of people on each team, and just said, right, just for the next few days, just build something with the Dino stuff. Whether it's with the tiles or the characters or the dice, and we ended up with three completely different games. One of them was like a dice-based beat 'em up, which involved the rolling of the dice and probability and all of that kind of thing, and this dice versus dice kind of thing, which is quite interesting. One of them was a space shoot 'em up that was kind of taking traits of the dice to build spaceships, and you were flying around this, which had never crossed our minds that you'd do something like that with it. And another one was a multiplayer capture the flag kind of thing, using the characters and using the skills that the different characters have, really just quickly transplanted into a different game genre. And they all worked really well. And it really, for me, sort of confirmed that idea that you give people these playful things and some freedom, then they're going to do things that we never thought of. And it's always the great thing. It's why I always prefer working with other people than sitting there on my own trying to make a game, because there's only so many ideas that you have, but you open that up to a whole team and it becomes bigger, but you open it up to the whole world and it becomes astonishing. So and you've seen that with games with a lot of modding, whether it's Stardew Valley or Minecraft, an even better example probably, that the things that happened in that ecosystem because it was pretty open. And I think, one of the great things with Web3 is you can go further than that. I always use the phrase modding plus plus to describe what I would like to see happening in this space.
What, in your view, will it take to get there? think Minecraft is a good example. Minecraft had a really good core loop. I remember, this was like 12 years ago, watching YouTubers playing Minecraft, and just the basic version, the vanilla Minecraft version. There was no servers that you could spin up. It was single player. How were you thinking about solving the gold star problem and making sure that, creators actually start creating meaningful experiences that will drive in new players that maybe don't want to play a game like Beneath the Six, and how you see that flywheel effect kicking in?
Well, you're not going to attract people who don't want to play a game like Beneath the Six to Beneath the Six, or indeed to the wider hobby, right? So first you've got to understand that that's where your core comes from. Minecraft had a brilliant, like I maintain that the reason behind Minecraft's success is its opening hour, which is you arrive in this blocky universe and you can toy around for whatever it is, 10 minutes, but then night starts to fall and the zombies come out and you are forced to dig a hole in the ground, and you cover that hole up with dirt and you can hear the ark outside, and you're like, oh God. And then eventually dawn breaks and you're like, okay, I'm safe again, but this time I'm going to make a slightly nicer house and I'm going to build a window in it or something so I can see. And then you're in that loop immediately. That it's just, I'll build my house bigger and bigger and bigger. As you do, you see a thing, like, oh, maybe I should build my house over there actually, because that's a prettier place. And then you're in, right? Fundamentally, that has nothing to do with the wider community of why Minecraft is brilliant and why it's a phenomenon. That's just how they trap the players. So that comes back to what Harry and I have been saying sort of for the last half hour, which is you've got to build a game first. You've got to build a really, really good game. Now, there are 10,000 games coming out every year, and very few of those people have a different thesis. They all want to build a good game, right? Like very few people set out and go, oh, I just want to build something that is cynical, right? Everyone's proud of everything that they make. So doesn't matter. You start with your core loop. You start working out, how do we get people into Beneath the Six? Now we've got some ideas around that, and there's some what we regard as unique things about the game that set it apart, that we think will hook people in and get people in that loop. But you also have to understand where your initial audience is. And we think our initial audience is some of the Web3 smart people who are hungry for good games in that space that also show glimpses of what this space could be. And also players who just play these sort of games. So that's where we're going to get our audience from. Now, when you've got those people in any audience like that, there are creatives who want to build and go, oh, what if it would be like this? Well, our SDK allows you to build new experiences and play around with that. And then you hope that they build other experiences that draw in other people, just as Minecraft got wider and wider and wider. And sometimes, there are people who don't care about that opening half hour. But it's the people who are initially attracted to that build the world. And eventually you end up at the space that Harry described right at the start, where there are multiple entry points for people who want to get into the hobby but don't want to play the game, just want to paint the figures because that's what they care about, or just want to write huge stories for this world and have their players, just want to DM, that kind of thing. You can't start building that, right? You can't go,
Yeah,
right,
I mean,
you've got a hobby. Come and join
the games
it.
industry is full of, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of these, Nico, people that are pitching platform plays, because platforms are always really exciting because look at the scale that we can achieve by being a platform, right? But there are almost no successful platforms that haven't come on the back of some kind of other successful product. Unity is actually probably an exception, that Unity, was coming from a game developer, but they didn't have a successful game first. But other than that, I can't think of many. You think of like something like Steam, right? Steam is so phenomenally successful now. But if Valve hadn't developed Half-Life 2, which at the time was the best game, and forced you to install Steam, much to the fury of gamers who thought it was outrageous to be forced to install Steam, especially when they bought this game in a shop on a disc. Why were they having to install Steam? But without that, it may well be, I'm sure there were plenty of companies that had the ability to create a great digital distribution platform in the early 2000s, but it took the greatest game in the world, arguably, to to facilitate that. And I think that happens time and time again. You know, would Unreal Engine be as successful as it was were it not powering some incredible games before that? So yeah, I think it's a tall order, right? It's all we've got to do is build an amazing game that everyone wants to play, and then all this other stuff on top of it. Well, you know, building an amazing game that everyone wants to play is incredibly hard. So you know, we are. This is one of the reasons why we're putting out versions of it or subsets of it incredibly early, which you wouldn't normally do. But because we want to take it slow, we want to get some validation, we want to get some customers that like it and build with them. But it's definitely not going to be easy. I mean, I think that's the big challenge for this whole space is massive, ambitious vision in the long term, but baby steps to get there, and not really any roadmap to follow because it's so new.
A big part of your press release and the accompanying video is centered around AI voice. It's really interesting to me. But what can you tell me about that? How did that process? How did you decide to get that into your game?
Well, the starting point was that we want to be ultimately generating content that is unique to every user. So where we're starting is with generating a whole new procedural world every day. Just these arena worlds, which are simpler than the bigger worlds that we'll be creating later down the line. But further along than that, we want people to be able to own their own worlds. If you own your own world, you can curate that world, you can put things in the world, you can determine, who can play in your world. If you want to, you can, hide some treasure on level 15 of your world and invite your friends in to play. You can, do all of the things that a dungeon master could do in Dungeons and Dragons. It's your world to do with as you want. Now, we've built already a lot of technology. Steve said we built it for the dice, first of all, being able to generate, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of sets of unique dice, being able to do the same thing with characters and then doing the same thing with worlds. But being able to do these things at that kind of scale rather than at the scale of, most existing Web3 games, which might only have to cater for a few thousand players. The NFT drops that we saw last year and the year before was typically kind of, 5,000 to 10,000 unique things. And that's a kind of manageable project. It's not manageable to do 5 million unique worlds hand built. So everything we have to think about everything in that generative sense. And around the time that we were sort of starting to put out the arena, we got to know the guys at 11 Labs, who are we have a pre-seed investor in common in Concept Ventures, and it just felt like actually this is a great example of the kind of technology where we can we can generate content every day. We can't get an actor from the TV to come in every day and record a new set of 1,000 lines of dialogue to go live at midnight every night because we've generated a new dungeon. But we can, with 11 Labs, create an amazing AI voice that can then generate that. So it's just one example of the kind of approach I think you have to take when you're creating this bespoke content for large numbers of people, and ultimately allowing other people to create that bespoke content. If you've got a million people all curating their own worlds with their own stories and their own characters in that world, and you want a narrator to be telling you your way through the story, well, every one of our users isn't going to go and hire an actor from the TV to come and speak in their ear, but you can do it with tech. And I think the other thing we were really keen to do with AI is think about some of the ethics of it. There's been a lot of talk about AI taking work away from people, or companies being able to use people's voices or likenesses or whatever, ad infinitum forever. So we were really keen to kind of be an early pioneer, as we're 11 Labs, very keen to look after the role of the artist in this thing. So that's why part of the press release also talks about the kind of deal that we've structured there that I hope can be a sort of framework that people can use going forward, whether it's for voice or image or whatever other kind of generative AI people use.
I'm just finished watching the newest season of Black Mirror, of which the first episode talks almost exactly about that, where actors more specifically give their likeness and allow generative AI to use them in simulations and more specifically TV shows. Could you elaborate maybe a bit on how you're thinking about, well, the kind of deal you struck and how you set that up, where you think, this is how this makes sense sustainably moving forward?
Yeah, I also saw that episode of Black Mirror and thought much the same. I mean, there are parallel. I mean, not that you want to be comparing your business model to something that Charlie Brooker has written in a dystopian near future. But yeah, I think that it was interesting. But I just think generally it's a good thing to behave well. I've been in the games industry for 30 years and generally haven't fallen out with anybody. And I think, part of it is just, don't be horrible, right? Don't exploit people, make sure you pay people, all of this kind of stuff. And so, part of it is just wanting to be a good actor. Part of it, I think, is also just looking at the Web3 space. By the time Ste and I started looking at this space seriously, it was already quite tarnished with a lot of scams. And, sometimes out and out scams, as we know, but sometimes just sort of naivety of behavior. We saw quite a lot of sort of naive game projects. The same thing happened with Kickstarter 10 years ago. A lot of people kind of thought, yeah, we're going to raise $20,000 and we're going to make an MMO to challenge World of Warcraft. And, loads of these projects that I think were probably often started with good intentions, people not realizing quite how difficult and expensive it is to do this stuff. So, yeah, in terms of the AI voice, I think it's just wanting to behave well. It's kind of looking into the future. You don't want to be, I don't think, a company that is accused of exploiting voice actors, right? So we made a point of saying to the voice actor, this is yours. We don't want to own this. It's not an area that most voice actors were even very familiar with when we started the conversations. They didn't know that we could replicate their voice, and they were kind of blown away when they saw what we could do. But I think it would be very easy, as I think used to happen quite a lot in the music industry. Someone in the 50s signs an exploitative contract, have 1,000 number one hits, and don't make any money out of it. I don't want to be that band manager that did that to someone, I was reading examples of people saying, this big company and this big company, if you do a voiceover for them, the contract says they can use this voice for anything, including building an AI voice. It just feels like a lot of people could be signing contracts here that are actually going to have negative implications for decades of their life. And again, you kind of want to avoid that, I think.
I think that's totally fair. So what we just did was we started the conversation by, remembering last year where you were. Now we're talking about where you are now. Part of what I like to do with catch-ups with companies, even if we don't invest in them, is, trying to make predictions or at least a milestone of where do you want to be next year. So if we do this again, maybe again with gin and tonics at Develop in Brighton, where's Magicave at in a year from now?
I like the way that we're both pausing.
Well, I was just thinking I'd spoken too much already.
You were thinking, I hope Harry or I hope Steve take this one.
I mean, I'm happy to, if you want, I can just talk some more about voice AI. And then,
No, Steve, you're getting the hard question.
So, yeah, it's an impossible question. We are going to put out the arena demo not demo, you know what I mean, arena test, combat test in a couple of months. And that's going to be deliberately restricted. We'll have a certain number of codes to give away, and people will get those codes on our Discord. They will claim them, and then when there are no more codes, there are no more codes. And what we'll do is we'll learn about how people are engaging with the game from that. And if all goes well, we'll, after 2 weeks of testing, we'll be like, brilliant, this has got incredibly high engagement. Everyone loves us. The only feedback we've got is that we're great and brilliant, and they can't wait.
That's what always happens.
deleted all their other games, and they're never going to play anything other than Beneath the Six, and when is Above the Six coming out, and all of this, right? That's your sort of optimal. And the other end of that is, you know, a number of people installed it, everyone played it once, that was it. No one played it ever again, and we got nothing but torrents of abuse to our feedback email address, or that the game didn't even work. Who knows? Like those are the two extremes, and somewhere in between that is what's going to happen. And what's going to happen from that combat test informs what happens over the next 10 months. That informs what we develop. We will be building this out into a fuller game, and I would expect that to take about a year. I would also expect during that year us to embark upon some side projects as well, some other things informed by what's going on around us and the things that we've learned from those tests as well. But it's a fast-moving space. The only thing that we could have predicted a year ago is that the bubble would pop. And we were predicting that when we were pitching, and we were right. And that's why we're glad we have the sort of pitch that we do, which is build conservatively, think about the technology, think about where it's going, watch what's going on around you, but stay on target and try and build a good game. That's what we're going to focus on over the next year.
Yeah, and I think, doing this incrementally. So, the combat test goes out, and I guess one thing we could learn is we learn nothing from the combat test. It's quite possible that even this idea of building these things incrementally turns out that wasn't a great idea after all. But assuming that is a good idea, then there'll be more of those incremental steps. So, the next version of the game will likely have some elements of exploration as well as combat. Might not have the full, stories. There's going to be an awful lot missing. It might not have all the characters or all the dice, or maybe it won't have multiplayer. But there'll be a tangible step on a few months after that first one. And then a few months after that, there'll be another tangible step on. The big components at the moment, at least in our minds, are, arena gets the combat right. Exploration gets the sort of longer term gameplay. Then sort of more depth in the exploration, more purpose to it. It's one thing to have a big world, but really you want purpose and story and, it's sort of increasing difficulty. That's a slightly unsophisticated way of describing it, but sort of narrative, and I mean that in a gameplay sense as much as a sort of word sense. But narrative kind of driving you through the game. Then there's the elements of multiplayer gaming. What does it mean when there's now three of us going through this dungeon instead of one of us? What does that change? What do we need to tweak? Does it mean the dungeons have to be bigger? Does it mean the character? And then learning more about how much do people care about whether they're playing with a wizard versus playing with a barbarian? Are they different enough in experience? Do we need to make bigger differences? That kind of thing. And then the sort of just slightly further down the roadmap is when it starts getting more, from a Web3 point of view, I think more interesting. And you're then into, okay, now I own this world, or I own these things, and I am contributing to the ecosystem. I'm not just a player in it. And that stuff, I think you need all the other bits right first. And then that stuff starts to get very, very interesting. And ultimately, not in 1 year, but in a number of years, we see this thing being a decentralized hobby that people are adding to. I remember, going back to D&D, you'd have the 3 books that I bought when I started playing D&D, but you'd also buy a magazine, and the magazine might introduce a whole new character class, or might introduce new spells or new weapons, or and that was great because it gave a sort of fluidity to that hobby, and that's when I think it starts getting really exciting. But there's just so much to do first.
Good thing we have Harry who actually answers my question.
I mean, yeah, this is the second time in the last 6 months you've answered this question. You've asked me this question because when I was on your podcast at the start of the year, you asked me predictions over the next year, and those predictions haven't changed either. The next year in this sector, and by sector I mean the Web3 sector rather than the gaming sector, although this goes for both, is going to be really, really challenging for a lot of people. Our objective, with everybody, is to learn and survive. In a year's time, what I want is some practical example of what we're building out there and people enjoying it. I want a small community on our Discord who believe in and love our hobby. I want regular D&D nights where we talk about the Beneath the Six world and people participate with us, and I want to grow from there. Is that concrete enough?
So much better, Steve. Why didn't you start with that?
I think I would also like there, this is all out of our hands, but I'd like there to be more clarity on regulatory stuff and also just on, are people liking this? There has been, feels to me like a lot of the negativity, people are getting a bit more relaxed about it. People are starting to see this doesn't necessarily all have to be a scam. Hopefully that continues. Do people start to embrace it? We don't know yet. What would be great is if we see that trajectory is okay. That it's not the case that only 1% of people are ever going to care about blockchain stuff or digital ownership. I think the talk of blockchain or which blockchain, all of this stuff is a blip. I think it kind of doesn't matter. It's more important. It's just it is the concept of owning something that you can't pick up, something that people are going to want to engage with or not. Is digital ownership a thing? And so it would be good to see that that's moving in the right direction. And if it's not, we need to be able to react to that too. If it's moving more slowly than we anticipated. And also, on the regulatory side, we see the SEC being very aggressively anti certain things in crypto. Now, at the moment, we're really glad. And we took a decision when we were first talking to you. We said, we were pretty nervous about the idea of putting out tokens, all of this stuff, because there's a lot of lack of clarity. We can see some reasons why you do it, but we can also see some reasons why you wouldn't want to do it. And so sort of addressing all of those issues, at least starting to find out what's okay, what's not, with different jurisdictions and with the general public is going to be, I think we'll be in a better place to know in a year's time.
If people are inspired by this and really want to try your combat lists, where can they find out more?
Easiest thing to do is to go to our main corporate website where things are linked from. So if they go to magicave.io, magicave.io, they can get to our Discord or our Twitter from there. If they want to go straight to our Twitter, it's DNODICE, DNODICE. Either of those will be the best entry point for us.
Fantastic. Good. And how about yourselves? If people want to keep in touch with what you guys are up to, Steve, do you want to talk about this weekly thing you do, which is definitely not a podcast?
People are welcome to follow my radio show, which is One Life Left. It's the longest running radio show about video games in the English language. That the caveats on that seem to get longer every time. Actually, there's one in Spain. Actually, there's been one running in Scotland for 300 years. We've been doing the radio show for 17 years, so broadcasts on a station in London called Resonance FM, which is excellent as well. You can find me on Twitter at Steers Here. You can find me at Develop, doing Karaoke, which is pop songs about video games. That's on the Tuesday night. It's sold out, but if you come on the door at 9 p.m, you can probably get in. There'll be people who arrive and leave. Don't know why, Nico.
I don't understand either. Yeah, I'd be there all the time.
You and Harry are both on holiday, so neither of you.
Yeah.
Poor timing.
Yeah. Harry, how about you?
Well, I don't have any of those things, but I do have a Twitter account, which is Holmwood, HOLMWOOD. So feel free to follow me on there. I can't guarantee it's going to be insightful, but it will be. It will be a way that you can follow what I say.
Good.
I'm on Twitter as well at Steers Here. Did I say that already?
You did say that.
Okay. Well,
it's good to repeat that. That's okay.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right, Harry and Steve. As usual, I always enjoy chatting with you. I hope we can do this next year. So Harry and I, we make sure we don't book a holiday during Develop, and we're just there, and then we can do a recording and then karaoke and sing some songs together. That'd be amazing with enough gin and tonics, which we'll need. Good, Harry, Steve. Really appreciate you joining. Audience, listener, if you enjoyed this, please check out Magicave. Highly recommend it. You can, I'll be playing the playtest, and so we'll be giving my feedback. And if you enjoyed the show, let us know as well. And with that, we are out, and we look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Ciao.
Thank you.